Hey, so we are here in the post. Yesterday, we did the mini conference, 4 hours of Laura and I talking about dialogue. And this is the post mini conference. I need to put these Legos away or I'll keep playing with them while I talk and they'll squeak and Laura will get mad at me. But I will get a paper clip and fiddle with that because you can't hear it. Anyway, but now I'm just rambling about random things. So we did the mini conference yesterday and we came back for an after party and a couple people actually joined us. So I'm going to ask them all to introduce themselves. JP, why don't you go first?
Well, I'm JP Rhineflush, co-host of Red Wave Podcast, and I write dark urban fantasy.
Nice. Faye, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Faye White, and I am a veterinarian by day, and at night I write about superhero moms.
Nice. Bella, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Bella Rivers, and I haven't published yet, but I write contemporary romance.
Awesome. Laura, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Laura Hum, and I am very surprised that people came back to listen to us after 4 hours yesterday.
4 hours yesterday. I thought you guys would all be done with us.
I had a ton of fun, though. So if you all had half as much fun as I did, then I can understand why you're back. But
yeah, I love talking about dialogue. It also makes me super exhausted. So I got to say, like, I was dead to the world until about 10:30 this morning. After we finished, I was just like, that's my introvert self. Like, I love people and love being around people, but even on Zoom, if I'm around people for more than a couple hours, I'm like, I need a really long nap by myself alone with no one else around.
I had an accidental 5-hour nap. I laid down to order dinner on my app, and I woke up like 5 hours later. It was like, did I eat dinner?
It's really funny.
Yeah, it was bad.
That's hysterical. All right, so let's so yesterday we did 4 hours of teaching on characterization and on building a cast. And it was great. We had like 13 people there. It was fantastic to have everybody there to do that. And today we just wanted to come back. I've got a couple questions to ask just to kind of brainstorm, and I know Bella asked a question in advance, which I really appreciate because it's a really good question. And if you had just dropped it on me, I would have, oh, that chat scared the crap out of me. If you had just dropped it on me you would have heard me ramble for like 20 minutes. So I appreciate you emailing it in advance because I would have been like just talking in random things for 20 minutes and then finally got around to the actual answer. Yeah, it's great. So before we jump into Bella's question, anybody else got a question? Anything you want to talk about that we covered yesterday that we didn't fully cover? I know I have things. No? All right, awesome. All right,
What about first impressions?
Oh, okay, good. Yeah.
What'd you think like when you logged off? Nothing.
Well, I thought my brain hurt. But it was excellent because this really tied a lot of pieces in the podcast that I've been listening to for you for Dialogue Doctor. And this just really put everything together and then some. So it definitely helped. I had the character wheel to my other screen as I was listening to you, and I was starting to populate one of my projects, and it was good.
Were you doing the project we're working on together?
Well, yeah.
Yes, good. Obviously. I was really hoping you were. JP, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about that. JP and I are playing around with a Vela project together. That's fun. We're doing like short stories. Vela's like 1,500 word episodes that you pay for by tokens on Kindle that they're getting ready to release. So JP reached out to me and asked me, like, I think you were asking me to like come on a podcast and talk about it. And I just assumed you were asking to do something together. And I was like, yeah, I'd love to write one with you. And you were like, write one with me. Okay. So yeah, the novel I'm currently working on is way too emotionally straining. So I'm like writing a chapter a week and that's all I can emotionally handle. So I was super excited to have something just fun and stupid to do, which I feel like what we're writing is it's comedic. So it's just kind of fun and dumb. Yeah. Anybody else? First impressions?
Yeah, I thought it was great. It felt like boot camp, honestly. And I was also taking a bunch of notes to apply to my current manuscript. So, a bunch of ideas for my characters. And also, I found myself writing down the time, which was convenient because we started at 12. And when I had I have to go back to that, I would just write down the time like 2:38.
Oh,
So
that's smart.
I have my notebook here. And so I
Nice.
have like, okay, 2:38, I need to listen to that part because no, I don't think, not right now. I'm not going to re-listen to 4 hours of that because it was
Yeah.
really intense. It was great. I will. I know that probably in 3 months or 6 months from now, I'll just listen. But yeah, anyway, so that was the kind of intensity I experienced. It was just great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it
Yeah, and just to
was.
clarify for people listening, we gave everybody a recording of the 4 hours after it was done. So for yeah, Faye, I'm sorry I cut you off. Were you gonna say
That's
something?
okay. Yeah, it was. I found it to be very intense and everything was really distilled down. So I'm really looking forward to, after a couple weeks rest, going back to go through it all again.
Nice. That's awesome. Laura, did you have first impressions?
Again, I was just really excited to see that so many people wanted to hear what we had to say about dialogue, and that everybody was so excited and engaged and had such great questions, like to think about not just how to apply what we were saying to the work that they were currently doing, but just like the conceptual aspect of it. You know,
Mhm.
you and I spend a ton of time, Jeff, talking about dialogue and thinking about dialogue and how background impacts that dialogue. To hear other people be as excited about that as we are, it was pretty cool for me. So
Yeah, and I think for me, this is the first time, this course was the first time that you and I have sat down and put an entire like set of teachings together at one time. Like we did the 10-week mastermind course or however many weeks that was. This super long mastermind course we did. And I do like like two or three of these a week. But I'd record them like an hour apart. So they were, and then I talk to authors about this stuff all the time. But this was the first time I've sat down and done like, okay, let's do just 4 hours on characterization and get it all out in one place. And it felt really good. I was really excited. It got me really excited about the book we're writing, which was good. Um, that was because I needed that motivation. Because a lot of times I'll sit down and talk about this stuff, and I'm like, is this crazy? But it's not. It's good. People find it helpful, so that's good. Um, I think it's that Jerry Seinfeld thing, the novel, the memoir I'm reading right now, which is just a list of all of his jokes. Is this anything? And he starts off talking in the memoir about how every time he writes down a joke, the immediate question is like, is this anything? Is this anything? And I feel like that every time I write or think about something. It's like, is this anything? And yeah, anyway. So it's nice to put it all together in one big package for the first time. Be like, okay, this all is coherent and works together well. So I think that was my first impression. Um, all right. What was your biggest takeaway? And I can go first. Laura's talk on the way you choose words to describe a character voice, where she broke it into dialogue, which were words and topics, cadence and pacing. That was great. That was really nice. I've heard you talk about those things, but I've never heard you like digest it so clearly before, and it was really great. I
well,
really
you only
liked that.
gave me 15 minutes to talk about it, so I
That's
make
right.
it as small as possible.
That's right.
And it's
You make me
funny,
sound like
David.
I'm a time driver, like some kind of like time, you know,
Yeah.
manager, mean person. That's not how we scheduled out what we talked about. We made the schedule of what we were going to talk about first, and then we divided it up by time limit. And then I threatened you. I didn't threaten you.
I cried. It was bad.
Tried. It was bad. Just
Yeah.
I'm really nice on the podcast, but off the podcast, watch out.
Yep.
Um, yeah. Anybody else major takeaway is going to help your work?
That section was the most helpful part of that section for me was when you went through the example of Scout from To Kill a Mockingbird
Yeah.
and kind of filled it all in, explaining it. That I found that very helpful.
Excellent. I had a lot of fun putting that together. Scout is, like many people, one of my very favorite literary characters of all time. It's one of the very few books I've read multiple times. I tend to not really read books more than once, but that one, it's probably the book I've read the most times in my life, and she's just so dynamic. It was hard not to use her as the example. So I'm glad it was helpful.
I think for me, sorry, it was the immediate takeaway, something that I probably did not expect was in thinking about the cast, to make sure that the characters complement themselves, but in sort of like a negative, they need to be there for a purpose, and they need to be there also as, not help me out with the word here, as a contrast.
Yeah.
The contrast, and that's something that I hadn't thought about consciously. So that was beyond just dialogue.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I find I love writing character voices so much. I find that when I write, I really had to focus on that at one point in my writing. Like, why are these characters here? Because I found myself adding characters just because I was really enjoying writing their voices, and they're really clouding up the book because you'd have these scenes. Like in one of my first books, I have a scene with a councilman black because I really liked the pacing of his voice, because I imagined this super fat guy who couldn't breathe while he talked, so he had to keep stopping to breathe. And so I wrote this chapter that no one, I really feel like it's probably unreadable because the pacing of his words is so weird, because where I like put periods and stuff. But and it's just no point in the plot. I just really liked writing that character's voice. And I remember one of the notes Laura gave me that I totally ignored as the editor was like, I don't understand what this chapter's here. And I was like, because it's fun for me. And I left it in. Totally should have taken it out. But all that to say, like, writing weird characters like that made me start to think about, like, hey, why are these here? Like, what's the point of this weird voice? And like, what are we supposed to be doing with this? Yeah, anyway, I'm glad that was helpful.
Yeah, I really liked the allies and antagonists portion of it, because prior to talking about dialogue, Chris, my co-host, and I, we've been talking about character development in terms of mirroring. So your allies and antagonists are variations of your protagonist, either a fractured mirror of them or a mirror. And so when we start talking about like baseline voices and how they can complement and mirror each other, and maybe there's just slight variation in your allies, and then there could almost be a drastic or fractured variation of that, like that just clicked really well with the conversation I was already having. So that was like really good for dialogue.
That's nice. Yeah, and I'll say with antagonists and allies, I really love the act of, like, when we build the chart of all the different voices, lining. So for, I forget that we're talking to a podcast, lining for podcast listeners, you can get that chart free on dialoguedoctor.com. Just go download it. But when you line the voices up, I really like, JD talking about mirroring. I really like the act of like taking the voices and then reading them and thinking for a moment about, like, okay, what scenes can I derive just from these two voices? Like, if I think about putting these two voices in a room, how does their conversation sound? Right? Like, and are they too much like each other, or is this a really nice, is there natural conflict being driven from the contrast and the complementation of these voices? Like, yeah, that's one of my favorite things to do when I'm starting a book, is to kind of be like, can I envision a conversation between these characters that's really going to be a lot of fun to read? Yeah. Laura, did you have a takeaway?
Yeah, I was really excited to hear like how you process using these tools.
How I process?
How you specifically, Jeff, which is really funny because
It's terrifying.
we've been working together and editing together for 7 years now on fiction work. And I know you have these tools. I know you use these tools. I know how I use these tools as an editor. And we talk about how to teach these tools, but we don't really spend any time sitting down just like talking about how we each individually use these tools. So hearing about like how you start, and sometimes you start with, you know, the voice, and sometimes you start with the background. I just thought that was really fun, just to kind of hear how you process through and use the tool.
Yeah, when I was talking about, so what you're describing, just for anybody listening, is like when you're designing a character, where do you start? And it was like, well, sometimes you're going to start with the background. Sometimes you're going to have like a really strong personality in your head, and you want to start with the personality. Sometimes you have a character voice, like that character I was just talking about that had no purpose in my book. It was a voice that I came up with, and I was like, oh, I want to write that voice. And now I know to give him purpose in the plot. But before, just like, yeah, so like where you start designing your character doesn't matter. And I'm just commenting because as I was talking about that, I saw your eyes get real big, like, ah.
That's great. Well, and it's funny that you keep talking about that character's voice being like he's having a hard time breathing, because that's actually background that's
It is.
creating that pacing in the voice.
Yeah.
Because you identified that he was really overweight and he was having trouble breathing. That's like physical characteristic in the root.
But
That's
when I
looking.
designed the character, I had the voice first
You, oh, so
because I
you,
was laying up with my journal one night and I was like journaling out the different, like, these are the scenes I want to write. And I remember sitting there going like, well, I like to do this thing with my journal. I know people are like, Jeff is crazy, but that's what I was doing, like at night, like with my journal. And I was like, why would somebody talk like that? I was like, oh, if they're really fast and they have to like, if they're really fat and they have to like stop to breathe.
nice.
Yeah. So it did start with the
Okay, so
voice.
it did start with the voice,
Yeah.
and
Back
then
into background and
nice, nice.
yeah. Yeah. Anyway,
That's really exciting.
I don't know if it's
Fun to hear.
exciting.
I think it's
It's,
exciting. Again, not being the creative, like I
it's a
can
little-
recreate all day long. I can help creative people reach their vision, but I can't come up with nothing, something out of nothing. Like,
yeah. That's why I really feel like editing is such a unique skill that, like, you know, I fully embrace that not all writers can edit and not all editors can write because they're two completely different mindsets almost. Yeah. Um, okay, let's get to Bella's question. Bella, you asked a great question. Can I just read it? Is that okay?
Sure. Although I was reading it back and I must have been really tired when I wrote that. But anyway.
Oh, I thought it sounded
Okay,
great.
it still makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, it made total sense to me because, and so, yeah, anyway,
All right.
let me read the question and then I was about to start to answer it before I read it. How does a character's self-understanding impact their voice? Why does it need to be self-understood, in quotes? In other words, if something in a character's background were unconscious or not self-understood, would it impact their voice?
Would it not impact their voice?
Or would it not impact their voice? That's a great question. So we were talking about at this part in the conference, defining what a personality is and like how a personality springs from character background. And in hindsight, Bella, I need to apologize because this was the section I said that like it was supposed to take 30 minutes and I was so nervous I did it in like 10. So so your question's completely reasonable because I mean, it's a really good question, but it's totally I should have expected it because I like slammed through this section of the stuff so fast. So when we're talking about personality, we're talking about and let me say, social scientists and like psychologists who study personality will have a conniption fit at my description of personality because they'll be like, what are you doing? um and I know that I'm like breaking, like I'm ignoring tons of research and science and all kinds of stuff, because what I'm doing is I'm talking about like, how as a writer do we shortcut this process to define a character's personality? Like I don't actually care about the science of it at this moment. I've read a ton of personality science and I love it, but that's not what this when I say the words personality, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like, as a writer, we need to build these characters. We need to have these characters have personality. That personality needs to make sense for the reader with their backstory. So like the backstory and the personality need to be aligned. Because if a character's shy, but in their backstory they have all these big adventures, the reader's like, why are they shy? that doesn't make any sense. Or like if a character is verbose and excited and like um this big risk taker, but their past is like, and they were lived in a quiet house in the country. It's like, well, okay, how are they this risk taker, right? Like we need our personalities to line up with our backstory. So when I talk about personality, that's what I'm talking about. I talked about how personality is a conversation with the world that you've created. So the world, we take the character's backstory, and then the world is viewing that backstory through a certain lens, the world you as a writer have created. And that lens creates what I was calling self-understanding, which is, Bella, what your question is about, an understanding of self, the character's self. And then that understanding of self leads to the character's voice, how the character projects themselves into the world, which then the world, also feeds back on, which interprets self-understanding. In hindsight, Bella, what I probably should have used is the words self-narrative as opposed to
Mhm.
self-understanding. Because when I
Okay.
say self-understanding, I'm talking about the story you tell yourself. So like the way that you talk to yourself about how the world views you, your place in the world, your identity, all those kinds of things. Um, I was reading a really interesting article today for Pride Month, and I can't remember the source. I'll try to find it and put it in the show notes if I can. About it was a woman describing her um, coming of understanding of her lesbianism, and she's talking about how as she started to come out, people started to respond, and that impacted how she presented herself to the world. And like realizing that like she was in this conversation with the people around her, not even realizing it, like making decisions. So it's a really beautiful article about her kind of finding her own identity. If I can find it, I'll drop it in the show notes. But all that to say, that's what I mean by self-understanding, is
Got it.
that we have this story we tell ourselves about who we are. Now, whether that story is self-aware, whether that story is aware of culture's opinion of us, or blissfully unaware and just like, making decisions, it doesn't, like, if the character is aware that they are shy because they feel pressed down upon, or if they're shy because they are self-conscious, or if they're shy just because they're the fourth kid and they've had really loud siblings who did things for them, like whatever the reason is that they're shy, whether or not they're aware of that is a totally different conversation, right? Like the key though is to understand that like your character needs to have a place in the world you've created for them, and their personality needs to relate to that place and be in conversation with that place. um, does that help?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, good.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we can talk about that. Any parts of, let's ask this question, this is a dangerous question, any parts of what we talked about over the 4 hours that you thought, man, I'd love another like 3 minutes on that? Faye's like, no.
I'm
Sorry,
thinking. I'm thinking.
I put words in your mouth, Faye.
I'm thinking here. Just give me a sec.
That's really funny.
I,
Well,
I wouldn't mind exercises like actually let's take this really
mm,
poorly written dialogue that somebody just vomited because that's what needs to happen,
yeah.
and let's make it really good.
Oh,
But
that's
that's not
actually
three
smart.
minutes.
Oh, yeah. And I don't have poorly designed dialogue that I can do right now. I mean,
Oh, right now, no. Okay.
I probably do in a folder somewhere that I could pull out and be like, look, I wrote this and it's crap. But I'm not prepared to actually analyze it. And you'll have to watch me cry over my own work. So we're not going to, I don't want to do that right now. Yeah, no, but I love that suggestion for the future. Laura and I were actually talking about in the future, maybe taking a chart and doing it as we talked. That would probably add an additional hour to the time, but maybe it's like a bonus episode afterwards. We could like take a take a sheet and fill it out together. Um, yeah, I would like to know. And Laura, I was actually thinking about this today. Could you? And I'm totally going to put you on the spot. You're not prepared for this at all, and I'm building up to it, so I won't let you prepare either because I'm like freaking you out, the longer I take to talk about it, the more entertaining it is for me. Could you give us like,
Our game of chicken,
yeah,
seeing how far you can push me
how
before I'm
far
like, I'm out of this
before
dialogue.
you hang up on the Zoom and Laura's gone? Um, at work when I do this, she just kicks me out of meetings. She'll just like fire
Okay,
me from the Google
to
chat.
be fair, I only ever did that one time. I wanted to do it a
It's
lot of
true,
times,
and I
but I
deserved it.
only actually did it once.
Um, okay, so I want like another 2 minutes on pacing,
On
on pacing of
pacing.
voice. And you don't have to have a new 2 minutes, maybe just the same
Yeah.
2 minutes, but I would like to hear pacing of voice again because I was taking notes in my journal and I was like, these notes aren't making sense to me.
Okay. So pacing is about when dialogue shows up. And pacing is an interesting one because pacing is typically something that requires other characters or other story elements to activate. When you're talking about dialogue, which is, as Jeff mentioned a little bit earlier, is about the words they say and the topics they choose, that's all the character. You can do whatever you want with that. When you're talking about cadence and you're talking about the ebb and the flow of the words, the grammar structure is cadence, the punctuation is cadence. That's all character. You can do anything you want with those elements. Pacing, you actually need other people talking or prose to bounce off of to choose the pacing. So part of pacing is thinking about when a character is going to talk within a scene. So like when we talked about Scout in To Kill a Mockingbird, if you read, Scout is often the first one in a scene to speak because she's so quick-witted and she's so precocious, and even that childishness that she brings to the table, like those are things that make it difficult for somebody to like keep their thoughts to themselves or even like process them. So they tend to be the first one in a scene to speak. So thinking about pacing, about when you want your character to talk. You know, we've been talking about people who are shy. In Jeff's last example, somebody who's shy, like how does their pacing happen? Well, somebody who's shy is often very hesitant to talk. So if you have a scene that has two or three other characters other than the specific voice you're writing, oftentimes you'll see two or three exchanges happen before that shy person steps in. So pacing has to do kind of with placement of dialogue. It also has to do with the back and forth of the two characters themselves. And I'm really trying not to use rhythm in that case because we use rhythm when we talk about cadence. But when in the Slack channel, you'll often hear me talk about beats and how many beats a character is speaking. Beats is tied very directly to pacing. So if you have somebody who has really short sentences, and then you have somebody who has really long sentences, that is an uneven beat as it relates to pacing. And that can be really interesting, especially if you have a character who is a big talker and a character who like grunts and nods a lot. We've done a breakdown character chart of Guardians of the Galaxy. This is Rocket and Groot, right? Rocket talks and talks and talks and talks, and Groot says, I am Groot.
I am Groot.
And Rocket talks and talks and talks and talks and talks, right? Like that is an uneven pacing, but it works because of that character dynamic that the writers created there. Sometimes you want pacing to happen really fast. Typically, if there's in a really emotionally intense scene that you want characters to go back and forth very quickly, you're going to keep each character's statements very short, and you're just going to bounce them one right after the other. And it almost looks like when you're looking at it on the page, you're only using half the page because they're going so quickly. That pacing technique oftentimes helps increase the emotional intensity of the scene, because the reader doesn't have time to stop and think about anything. They're just moving forward with the pacing. So this is why pacing, while it's important in your dialogue, is a little bit different than cadence and dialogue, because it really requires somebody else to participate most of the time. Does
That's
that
great.
answer the question?
Yeah, that was really helpful. I think I was getting lost, not lost, but um, I think I was getting it confused with cadence, because I was thinking that like pacing is the length of the sentence. So to hear that like cadence is grammatical structure and length of the sentence and like all of that.
Length of the sentence can be cadence, but it's the reason I tend to put it with pacing is because it's about how the length of the sentence matches other people's.
Yeah, and so I'm hearing that pacing is like the comparison between.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really good.
It's definitely more of a compare and contrast. So
Yeah.
sentence structure can be like the length does go with the grammar. I tend to think, like, when I'm dividing it up, for those of you who didn't attend the class, I used a graphic of a pie chart that was subdivided into 3 sections. I tend to put like length in that section right on the line of pacing, but right butted up against cadence. Because as I mentioned, I think very visually, so I see everything kind of in my head as
Yeah.
I say it. So
Yeah, that's good.
I don't know if that's helpful.
That's super helpful.
Got it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Um, okay, anything else we want to cover in the time together? I think I've asked all my questions. Do we have, if I have any, the brandy's kicking in, so I don't remember anymore. If I had if I had other questions. Um, yeah, what is the so post con we're 20, were we 24 hours after the conference yet? We are. We're a little over 24 hours after the conference. What is the first thing you did with your characters post conference? I know I can tell you the first thing I did. I after the conference this morning, after I read all the notes JP had left me that I hadn't read yet, I went and started thinking about a couple of the characters we're writing and really started to consider voice for them, and really started thinking about, are they complementing and contrasting each other well? That was my, yeah. And they're perfect. We've written perfect characters, JP. We don't have to worry about it at all. Yeah, just so everybody knows. Anybody else? Any practical takeaways? What did you do with your characters first after the conference?
I have a character chart that I've been trying to work on, and I had to shorten all my descriptions because I put way too much information in there and it was way too unfocused. And I tried to do Laura's organization technique, but I'm not very good at it. So
Yeah, Laura's got super like color coding on her chart and all kinds of. I'm like, oh
I know
man,
she's magic.
yeah,
It's how I
this
see
is
it in
some
my
Laura magic.
brain. Like it feels really obvious to me, because that's like, it's how my brain organizes information. Well, that's exciting. And I got to have a sneak peek of Faye's chart this morning, and I'm really excited about it.
You want to fix it, don't you?
I don't. And here's the
Yes.
thing. Here's the thing about the wheel that I think is really important, as writers like work with Jeff and me, and they think about the tools that Jeff and I are putting on the table. They're just tools. They're like Word, right? Or Scrivener, or whatever program you're using to write. It's a tool to help you when you need help. But sometimes as writers, you have a voice that's very loud in your head, and it comes across really, really strongly on the page, in which case you only need to use the wheel to ensure consistency across your scenes. You don't necessarily need it to actually write. And I think sometimes, like, when you go back and you edit a chart, and when you say things like, well, my descriptions were too long. Well, they might have been too long to be practical to use it as a writing tool. That doesn't mean that the information was wrong or anything. So I would just say be encouraged by, like, if you can describe your character and their voice, really, that's all you need. The tool is just there to help you organize it.
Yeah.
I'm in Laura's organizational boat. I'm trying to be. And I was looking at Jeff and my character sheet we had, and I noticed that Jeff put personality in baseline, and it was like during Laura's conversation, and she's like, Jeff sometimes puts it over here, and I just move it, and I was just like, oh, okay. And so I just started moving it and reorganizing it, like, well, he won't notice.
You're right. He won't notice.
He'll actually open the chart and be like, oh, okay, that's what the voice is. I'll write that voice. Yeah. I really like having partners that just tell me what to do.
And I think those three, like, it doesn't matter where it goes within those three. And I think, to Jeff's point during the conference, as long as like you have it somewhere and it fits with what you like. But I'm very analytical. I mean, I have a degree in biochemistry. I'm one of those people. So I'm like looking at it, I'm like, but these three columns are different. They have to be.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I have a degree in religion philosophy. So for me, it's like there is no real column. The column is just a philosophical construct that we're
Is that why you love the Matrix's There Is No Spoon so much?
Oh, I love the Matrix's There Is No Spoon because it applies to so much in life.
I know. I feel like if I had $5 every time you said that, I could take us out to dinner someplace really expensive.
Yeah, that, or the many times that I refer to myself as an ex-blacksmith, even though I only did that for like 7 months in my life. Yeah. Yep. Laura would be taking us to Ruth's Chris if she had enough. If she had $5 every time I did that.
That's okay. There are lots of things I say and do a lot too, that if you had $5, you could take us more than to Ruth's Chris. You could take us to like Ruth's Chris in Vegas.
If I had $5 every time you fixed one of my charts or sentences and didn't tell me, I'd be super wealthy. Yeah. Wait, Bella, you're the only one we didn't get to. You don't have to have anything, but I want to make sure we gave you space.
You lost me. What was the question? Because
what's the first practical application thing you did post?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my first takeaway, was thinking through the characters and what purpose they're really, serving, and how I need to change them a little bit or a lot. So
great. All right. So I guess, do we have any more questions, Laura? Is there another question you want to ask? All right, y'all. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for coming to the conference. Yeah, you all get private sessions too, so we'll talk to you again soon.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Those are actually my favorite moments. The 4 hours of teaching is fun, but the sitting down and actually like doing work together is I think much better. All right, so I'm going to stop the recording and we can hang out for a couple more minutes before we go.